Greetings, true believers. Welcome back in, everybody. I'm Ed Berliner. The Talk Sports Network continues with Silverman on soccer in our first edition of 2022. Soccer, every day, every moment, every second, every bit of your life, every hour of your existence is all tied up in the beautiful game. Well, at least if you're doing this show, that's exactly true. Let's welcome in the veteran play-by-play announcer, the man who knows all, sees all, tells all about when it comes to the beautiful game, if you will. That's right, and adorning us today with something which will lead us off, if you will, into the nostalgia trend that we are these days. Bruce SIlverman joins us, resplendent, if you will, in his Georgia shirt, so I'm guessing we already know whom you were rooting for when it came down to the national championship.
Hey, I'm a proud dog. What can I say? But what's interesting is obviously the dogs get the win over Alabama 33-18 the other night. I was wearing this shirt, and it is my Georgia soccer shirt, which I bought back in 2014 when I was the voice of the Strikers. I wore this for every game that Georgia played this season, with the exception of the loss to Alabama in the SEC championship game. So, maybe that was my fault.
Well, but I have to tell you something. I have a litany of Boston Bruins T-shirts, including my jerseys. And it doesn't always work that way, and I do have it down to a system. I will wear a certain T-shirt until it runs out of victories. Then I will change to another shirt, and then I will go to the next. It has not been a very consistent season, although as we speak here today, it has been very good in the last week, and hopefully it will continue very soon. But on a nostalgia kick, if you will, wearing your old Georgia soccer jersey, let us then briefly here at the top talk about the nostalgia for soccer, because you seem to be pining for the nostalgic days of American soccer many, many, many moons ago.
I often wonder, look, we grew up with the Fort Lauderdale Strikers, and I often wonder, is the game more popular today in the United States than it was in the 80s? And I know there's a lot of factors that need to be worked into that. 70s as well, because from 75 to 77 played in the United States, which I think is definitely what made soccer propel in the 70s and 80s. And then obviously the NASL died, and when it died, soccer sort of died in the United States as well. And it was the resurrection of soccer and professional soccer and first division soccer with MLS back in 96 that changed things. But I wonder if soccer fans in the United States are as passionate about American soccer today as they were in the 70s and 80s. And I'm not 100% sure. I think we have more educated soccer fans because we live in a day and age where there's coverage in soccer and everything everywhere all the time. But I don't necessarily know if the passion is the same as it was in the 70s and 80s, because remember, 70s and 80s, no internet, really no cable.
Right.
You only got what you got. And yet there were 60, 70,000 people showing up to watch soccer in the 70s and the 80s. Maybe they don't have those same numbers today in the United States because they're not playing in the same buildings.
Well, see, I'm going to break it down into something a little bit different.
Could you get it?
I'm going to look at this from a different perspective. In America, we are indeed the melting pot. More people live here than any other place in the world. They come here from every country around the world. In the past, I would say that people rooted for their local teams. I've been to soccer games now where, more than ever, the people in the stands want the team to win, but they root for their Brazilian players, for their English players, for their Tunisian players, for their Middle Eastern players. They are rooting more for a national base than they are for the actual place itself. They root for the sport and the nation. But I don't see the passion for American soccer in this country until it becomes the Olympics, the World Cup, or especially the Women's World Cup, which I think has a greater push for national pride than the men's do by far.
Well, I think that was kind of my point. You look back, 1977, Strikers and the Cosmos, 8-3 was the win in the Meadowlands, and it was, what was it, 69,671 that record still stands. And so my question is, could you get that many people to an MLS game today?
Well, wait, let me amend that. Could you get that many people to an MLS game today, and would they be rooting for that MLS team, or would they be rooting for their nationalistic pride of the players who comprise the team?
Well, and that's why I say that I still think there was more, that there may have been more passion for the original NASL, because back in the 70s and 80s there was no cable, there was no internet, and basically you got the games that you got, and you learned about the sport by the clubs that were in your local area. And I think that did not allow for the tribalism that you were just discussing. And it would be interesting. Obviously, this discussion is kind of like saying, who is a better baseball player, Babe Ruth, or pick a player today than Stanton.
Yeah, see, I don't see it that way, because we're still talking about players in the sport. I think that soccer is split down the middle along nationalistic lines more
Oh,
than anything else.
I don't disagree. I don't disagree
Because
with
in
that. In the
baseball they
fact,
don't just root for the Asian player because he's Asian. They root for the team in many ways.
and that is, I think that has a lot to do with the fact that the United States is really late to the party when it comes to soccer. So as you were
Yes,
saying, there's a melting pot in this. There's a melting pot in this country, and so when people come from other countries, they're rooting for their player that plays for their national
which is
team.
fine. They
That's the
should. I
other,
mean, that's nationalistic pride. That's great.
and that's the other part of it too. And just comparing baseball and soccer, we don't really have international baseball. So when it comes down to baseball, it's your team. And when it comes to soccer, there are so many, and I know we're going to get into the World Cup again. There are so many different ways to watch soccer, and so many different teams and players to follow. Whether your favorite player plays for an MLS team or a Bundesliga team or an EPL team, and then they play for their national team. I think the world aspect of soccer is what makes it very, very unique, especially in the United States, because, as I said a moment ago, we're late to the party. And so players come from all over the world. They go to different teams, and fans typically know these players from watching other leagues and watching other countries during world events.
Okay,
So when they come here, they go player first, club second, or probably nation first, player second, club third.
I think there's a difference, and I'm going to back up a little bit on what I said about baseball here, because yes, there are people who watch Major League Baseball in America who root for the Brazilian player, the Asian player, the Mexican player. It is a very diverse background. However, when it comes to baseball, in those countries, baseball was not this massive global sport competing every 4 years for the glory of the planet in the World Cup.
Well, that was, yeah,
Very,
that's my
very different, and
point.
that's it. So they root for their players from their countries, but they still root for the franchise, the Yankees, the Mets, the Dodgers, whatever it is, because that's still the team. But in soccer, because you have that built-in nationalistic pride and that national team that competes for the World Cup every 4 years, I think that creates a very different dynamic where they are still
And
going to
we're
root for
on the
their
same
team.
page.
They're going to root for their country first, and then, oh, okay, my guy happens to play on the team in Miami, happens to play on the
Right.
team in Chicago. I don't really care if they win, but I care if my player does well. I think
We're,
that's the
we're
big
on
difference.
we're on the same page, and I will
Yeah.
I will end this segment with this. All right, seeing as we compared baseball to soccer, here is the question I'm going to ask you. I'm going to give you the final word on this segment.
Boy, are you
Baseball,
asking for trouble.
soccer. You ready?
Go ahead.
What is a better slogan? Baseball been very, very good to me, or football is life?
Football is life, because baseball been very, very good to me will be insulting to a lot of people, because it will work on what was basically nothing more than a 1970s character in SNL, and there will be a lot of people who will be offended by that.
Okay,
So,
maybe there's somebody who's offended by Danny. I don't know,
well, but I
but
don't
all
think
right,
they
I
would say
throw it out there.
football is life. I don't think offends anybody. I don't. You do?
No, no, no. I
Okay.
think they're both great. I think they're both great. That's the bottom line. And Chico Escuela is one of my favorite players of all time.
Well, Chico Escuela, of course, was again Garrett Morris on Saturday Night Live, and I can tell you that in this current society, there are people who would go, "Wait a minute, you're mocking," at that point, Latin American players by coming up with something that was nothing more than a television comedy trope for many years. See, that's the difference. If you're going to ask about slogans, people are going to put that in there every
I
single time.
asked,
Welcome to
I
2022,
asked
brother.
you answered. I asked you answered. Maybe another time we need to do soccer movies versus baseball movies.
That's going to be pretty much a done deal. That'll be over in about 30 seconds.
I don't know. There's some soccer movies out there.
Okay, well, okay. I don't know if you're allowed to use Victory because that's a World War II movie. And I really don't know if you're allowed to use Bend It Like Beckham because that was nothing more than a marketing ploy. So, okay, all right. Well, I'll give it to you.
I was gonna. I mean, don't forget kicking
Which
and
is what? Okay,
screaming and
really quick before we move
ladybugs.
on, then a soccer movie. When you say soccer movies, best soccer movie ever, go one time, one chance.
Kicking and screaming.
Okay, I thought you were going to
Robert
say
Duvall, Robert Duvall and Will Ferrell, and there was an NASL ball in there,
oh
and
man.
now Will Ferrell is an owner of a soccer team.
I swear I thought you were going to say ladybugs, and I was just going to reach through the screen and I was going to smack you stupid. I really was.
I mean, there's
Wow.
others. What was the one with Amanda Bynes when she pretended to be a guy? Um, I don't remember,
He's a
but
good
that was
goalie.
another
I don't
soccer movie.
know. I mean, I know what you're talking about, yeah, but I don't know if that was a soccer movie more than that was a teen romance movie. Okay,
Well, there's
we'll
always look. If you're going to make that connection, the Karate Kid was a soccer movie because Elizabeth Shue played soccer early in the movie.
what?
Well,
What are you on drugs? Have you been have you been drinking before the show? Karate Kid is not a soccer movie. It's a teen angst movie. Is all it is. It's
no kidding. I was just making the reference that if you're gonna turn the Amanda Bynes movie into a teen movie or into a soccer movie, then I was gonna make the
okay.
leap to Karate Kid. Look, if my jokes need subtitles, we're really in trouble.
They do. All
Nah,
right,
that's so
let's go
tough.
ahead and move on because the World Cup is still a big issue. We've been talking about it back and forth. We have to address this again. Gianni Infantino claims that the World Cup has all the surveys. They've talked to everybody around the world in FIFA and everybody in all of their clubs and all of the nations. They claim 64% of the world is thrilled about the possibility of a biennial World Cup every 2 years. And of course, everybody knows that numbers can be made to say absolutely anything you want because there are other surveys on the other side that say 75% of the world does not want it every 2 years. They want it every 4 years. So numbers say whatever you want. The issue, though, here is if the World Cup goes every 2 years, you are going to put women's soccer out of business. You're going to destroy women's soccer in America. You're going to destroy women's soccer internationally. You're going to do it at the expense of the fact that it's going to be seen as FIFA nothing more than a bunch of old white guys who don't really care about anything that women do. Because if you don't separate them, Bruce, every single day and every single week is going to be about World Cup qualifying, World Cup qualifying, World Cup matches, getting ready, then World Cup. You're going to go right back to it again. You have no
Well,
separation. The women's game dies if they do that. And I
I,
don't think FIFA gives a damn if it dies.
well, but there's a bigger part of that. One is I think you're absolutely right about what it will do to the women's game, but what it will do to the men's game in terms of clubs is basically the same thing. What's going to happen is you're always going to have players that are qualifying from clubs. So players are going to be leaving clubs, going to national duty. It is going to really affect all of the local clubs throughout the world. And it doesn't matter what league it is. It doesn't matter if it's MLS or NISA or USL or Bundesliga or EPL, you name it. Every time you have a qualifying match, you're pulling players away.
Which
It
then
is going to
means that
get
you're
to the
going to have national teams. Every country is going to have a national team that will play, and the players will play at that level every single day of the year without question. And you're going to have then a secondary and a third. It's almost like relegation, if you will, at that point, to where you're going to have on the teams, everybody will continue to play for their professional teams. They'll continue to play their games and their seasons, but there'll be no loaning to the national team. You have to earn your way onto the national team. And at that point, you sign with the national team. You're on loan from the national team, however you set it up. But there's none of this, I have to go back to my local MLS season and then I have to go to the national team, because it's one or the other at that point.
Well, right, and I think, like I said, I think that's going to destroy club play. And then the other question becomes, do the best players decide that they're going to play for their nation? Because nations aren't going to be able to pay the players what these individual clubs can
They're
pay
going to
them,
have to.
and then they're not going to be able to. The money's just not there. And then what do you do about developing players? What do you do about developing a player and then selling them? Look
Well, the
at what
development is
Orlando
those other
City.
leagues. The development is MLS. The development is NASL. That's the developing leagues. And then you're moving up to it at that point. It's almost as if you're graduating. You're playing down in these pro leagues to be able to say that I deserve to be on the national team. And if the national team's full, you can't play on the national team. That's the way it has
I
to
think
be.
it's a very, I think, look, I don't know what other conversations about this issue are taking place, but I don't think they're really trying to go down the rabbit hole and drill this thing down, because what every 2 years will do in terms of a World Cup may make FIFA a lot of money, but it's going to destroy the game worldwide. All the things that we talked about in the previous segment, all the things that we talked about national pride with local teams, where is that going to go if your players are playing at the national level and the international level, and they're not playing at the local level?
But that's okay. If you have a star Brazilian player who is playing for the New York City franchise in MLS, and the national team is filled both in Brazil, well, the Brazilian team is full, then he continues to play for that team until there's a role that's needed or a roster spot that's needed, and then he moves up. I'm telling you, it makes every other league except for FIFA, national teams, a minor league club. And FIFA's happy with that, Bruce. And I think people would still go see to watch their teams play because they can still root for their players and they can root for their franchise. But it's going to be on a lesser level. And then it's going to be a graduation, if you will, up to the national team. And here's another one. I'll give you another one. FIFA's got to bite the bullet on this one. And if you really want it to fly, FIFA's got to subsidize the national teams of a lot of countries who simply don't have the money. And not only that, but if, let's say, FIFA is subsidizing 20% of the national teams, the other 80% are going to go, wait a minute, cut the bullshit. You're giving them money, you got to give us money too. You have to subsidize everybody. That might not be a bad idea, but FIFA will never do it because that cuts into their profit margin.
It's the whole idea. The more we start talking about it, it just becomes something that is just not tenable, and just doesn't make a lot of sense. And you are right about what it will do to the women's game. And here's a question that I don't even know the answer to: is FIFA talking about the women's game, the women's tournament being every 2 years as well, or are they just talking about it for the men?
No, they're talking about the World Cup every 2 years.
I haven't seen that.
No, see,
I haven't seen it.
That's the whole point. FIFA is a sexist bunch of white, rich, wealthy, nationalistic pigs who don't give a damn about the women's game. If the women's game folds tomorrow and FIFA makes another $20 billion on the World Cup, they won't sniff. They won't even think twice about it, because that's the point. FIFA comes in and talks about the World Cup, not one discussion of the women's game, because they don't give a damn. It's a secondary class to them, and they don't care. And the women's team right now in every country, Bruce, they're helpless. What are they going to do? If FIFA decides to do that, then they're going to become a secondary league, and they'll never be able to get the money, the marketing, the training, the sponsors that they need, because it's all going to be shoveled into the main World Cup. That's why you've got to have it every 4 years. You got to have a separation.
And if you drill down on that even farther, you go to the women's game in Europe, where a lot of the big clubs in say England have women's teams, and then you've got multiple professional leagues now in the United States between what USL is putting together and what is already established with the NWSL. every time we talk about this, I get more and more uneasy about where the rabbit hole could take the game.
Well, the rabbit hole is wherever FIFA wants it to go. I mean, that's the whole point. And
So it'll be interesting to see what the pushback is from nations that don't agree or leagues that don't agree. And is this a watershed moment for the influence that FIFA has? Are we going to see people say, you know what,
yes,
FIFA has gone too far. It's time to walk away from them. I think we are at that point right now where we're really going to have to watch how this all unfolds, because right now, really, FIFA's the one doing the talking. I know Don Garber has come out and said he's not in favor of it, but there really isn't a lot of
Don Garber
discussion.
has nothing to say about it. I mean, and all respect to Don Garber, really, but he has nothing to say. If FIFA drops the hammer and says this is the way it's going to be, who's going to have enough power and enough money to come up and say we won't play? If the United Kingdom says we're not going to play in the World Cup, then are you kidding? Holy crap, there'll be a riot in England at that point, and in the UK. Same thing for any other country that is so into their soccer. You can't have it. So then you got to bend to their will. What are you going to do? Start a second World Cup? Good luck with that.
I know I'm pausing right now because I'm really trying to collect my thoughts. There's a lot of discussion in the United States about where the USSF is right now. And I know that there's an individual that wants to become the president again. And that could be a conversation for another time. But there are so many different factions of American soccer, and we've seen what that has done to American soccer. And the fact that USSF is not a unifier in that. If we start to see the same type of behavior taking place from an international standpoint with FIFA, it's going to be really, really interesting, especially considering that FIFA has already established itself with a very damaging reputation.
Well, here's the point. Unfortunately, the USSF has no power when it comes to this. They don't.
No.
And
I understand
other
that. I was
organizations
just
don't either. So that's why when FIFA says our way or the highway, it's unfortunate, but nobody's got any place to go at that point. You have to follow them. They are completely in control.
at the moment. At the moment,
So
let's
what do
see
you?
how
Oh,
this plays out.
so let's just create this in for giggles and grins. FIFA comes out and says our way or the highway. This is the way we're going to do it. Now, some major countries around the world don't agree. Fans are going to be pissed off. There's going to be screaming in the streets. What are they going to do? Their only option at that point would be to form a second World Cup or an alternative World Cup. And you and I both know
Or,
that would go over like a fart in a dressing room. It would
or,
die immediately.
or, what ends up happening is FIFA gets found out, FIFA backtracks, and their 64, 65% turns out to be 5.
So at the end of the day, FIFA wants world control. FIFA's going to get it
World
one way.
domination.
They do. FIFA wants world domination. The issue is going to be if anybody is going to bend to it. And when it comes to soccer, I think they will. I'll be honest. I think FIFA right now could do whatever they want, whenever they want, however they want, and a good portion of the world will bend because that's the power of the World Cup. And they will still look to screw the women's team, no matter how hard they can. I mean, they'll look to make a mess.
Yeah, well, like every other discussion in sports, we can talk all we want, and then we have to wait and see. So
Oh,
we'll play the wait and see game.
I'm not going to wait and see. I know exactly where everything's going, man. I know exactly. We've got that the whole 9 yards, and we're not going to back off on it. A reminder once again, if you want to get a hold of Bruce SIlverman, Silverman on Soccer, go to Facebook at Bruce SIlverman, and believe me, his hands work every now and then. It's just occasional. It just happens. And I got to tell you, Bruce is doing that on purpose because he is practicing to be a mime. So it all works beautifully when he's doing it. Or go to Twitter at Silverman Show. and you'll catch him there. Very nice. Look at you. All of a sudden, you're Marcel Marceau. And about 6 people are going to go ahead and get that reference from the old time. Reminder once again, you can catch us here on Talk Sports Network. Get a hold of me on @BerlinerSpeaks. And we're back, and we'll cause more consternation in soccer. Why? Simply because we can, and we do it on a regular basis. For Bruce SIlverman, everybody here, I'm Ed Berliner. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Rock on, true believers. See ya.